Thanks for joining us for the Secure Connections podcast, brought to you by IoTSSA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. As always, I'm your host, Brian Sherman, Content Director for IoTSSA, and joining me today to share his insight on IT security and compliance concerns in the retail industry is Nathan Sweaney. Nathan is a senior security consultant at Secure Ideas, a security consulting and penetration testing firm focused on improving the security posture of businesses, computing, and network environments. In addition, he serves as a security advisor for RSPA, the Retail Service Providers Association. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to dive into both roles today and learn a little more about what Nathan does, as well as the roles he plays for these organizations. So, first off, Nathan, welcome to the Secure Connections podcast.
Thanks a lot, Brian. It's good to be here.
Awesome. Well, first off, you have an impressive background in security in the retail space from the technological and business side of the equation. So I hope to dive into that a little bit today. But when did you decide, or when did you get into IT? Can you give us a little background on yourself?
Yeah. So I graduated with a degree in computer science, but didn't really know what that meant. And kind of by accident, I fell into a job at Tulsa Cash Register. At the time, a point of sale provider here in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Sure.
And I started out there with more on the network administration and systems admin side, and did a lot with grocery support of the different systems they resell. And over time, just kind of fell into security. That was when PCI was first starting out, credit card security issues and all that. And so I had an interest there, and it was a skill set that I had. So I started dealing with that, and over time just became more and more involved with not only securing our own systems, but how can we provide security to our customers? How can we secure the systems we sell, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the path that I took to get where I am.
Great. Yeah, I know that aspect of the retail industry is becoming more and more critical with each passing year. So looking forward to diving into that. Can you tell us a little about the company you work for, Secure Ideas, and what you do for the organization?
Yeah, so I've been with Secure Ideas for about 6 years now. And basically, we're a consulting firm. Companies come to us when they say, hey, we have these security controls we've put in place. We think we're doing a good job, but can you verify for us? Can you let us know how we're doing? And so we do different types of testing. Sometimes it's a penetration test where we're actually trying to, break into the company, whether it's their network or their mobile applications or web apps, or maybe it's physically break into the company. We also do a lot of training, and that's user awareness training, that's security training, developer coding, secure coding training, all different types of things like that. We really put a lot of emphasis on how do we make the security industry better, and how do we help companies secure themselves. So my role as a consultant, we're a small company. We've got about 20 people. Our headquarters is in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. But our consultants kind of spread around. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we've got folks all around the country. And as a consultant, I work with different companies every week to help them and whatever their initiatives might be. And we work for every industry, all sizes of companies, from small startups to, Fortune 50, all over the map.
Great. Yeah, that was actually a question I was going to ask, because I know we're focusing on retail today, but your business focuses across, multiple vertical industries as well, correct?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, we've worked with some really large national retail chains. We work with government, energy, education. Everybody, when it comes to security, everybody has the same concerns and the same issues. And so that doesn't really change where we work.
Certainly. I know the retail industry in particular is a little unique. And from a channel perspective, I was editor Business Solutions magazine, 17 years ago. And I know that those two channels are sometimes thought of separate as retail IT services and general managed services and IT services. So it's interesting. I like to take a dive in because the customers are similar, but they have some unique needs and unique compliance issues that I want to dive into today too, for those that maybe already in the industry or those that are looking at the opportunities in the retail space. But one thing I noticed is your company's tagline. I think it's awesome. Professionally evil. How does that fit in your team's sales and marketing efforts and the things that you're doing each day for your clients?
Yeah, so Most people, developers and network folks and sysadmins and IT people in general, they learn how to build stuff. And there's a special subset of skills of people that are good at breaking stuff. And the difference is when you're building something, you find one way to make it work to fit what you need to do, and you're done. But if you're going to break something, you have to consider every possible way that it might not work. And so it's just a slightly different way of thinking about stuff. And that mindset tends to be what separates good people from evil people. The evil people, the scammers and the con artists and stuff like that, they just have this way of thinking, how can I take a system that already exists, modify it a little bit, and make it do something that wasn't intended? We used to call them hackers, and that name's kind of gone, out of popularity. But so that evil concept is what we bring, but we're able to do it in a professional sense. Some people call it ethical hacking, which I have a little bit of an issue with. But the idea of being professionally evil means we can come at you and in a professional, organized, structured sense, we can help you look at your system as an attacker would and figure out, where the vulnerabilities are. And more importantly, how do those vulnerabilities turn into actual business risk that is, going to cost you money potentially.
Makes perfect sense. So would white hat be a good term for what you guys do?
Yeah. Sometimes people talk about the difference between white hat and black hat. The white hat is the good guys and the black hat's the bad guys. There's a lot of different terms. Honestly, Hollywood has kind of made such a mess of those terms that it's frustrating sometimes, for the layman to kind of understand what all that means.
Yeah. From a professional perspective, though, I always go back to, and I'm dating myself when I say this, I just remember the jeans commercials where they would show the machine just keeps beating on the jeans until they finally wear to show, where the weakness points might be is kind of on the security perspective. What companies like yours do is try to find, any gaps in the security that can be addressed before the bad guys find them.
Yep, absolutely.
Great. So can you tell the audience a little about the Retail Solution Providers Association, RSPA, I mentioned earlier. How did you end up as a security advisor for the organization?
Yeah, great question. So RSPA is the premier association for everyone involved in the point of sale ecosystem. So obviously that's resellers and different types of VARs, MSPs, hardware manufacturers, payment providers, anybody that is involved in providing a point of sale system to the end client, all make up the RSPA. Traditionally, it was mostly just resellers, but it's kind of expanded to different audiences there as well. They came to me a couple of years ago now about looking for somebody to fill this role as security advisor. My time, I spent about 8 years at Tulsa Cash Register, and so I have a very strong understanding of point of sale and the resale perspective. I've worked with a lot of the different vendors and stuff like that. And then my time as a security consultant has kind of helped me fill both sides of that role there. So the role that I have is basically I'm a free service to RSPA members. So anybody that pays to be a member and joins the association, they can call me up at any time and get free security advice. And so, if you're a small company, a reseller that's got, anywhere from 20 to 100 employees, those are arbitrary limits. There's no limit, but I'm saying right. if you're a small company, you probably don't have security staff. And so when you say, who do I go to ask this question about security? How do I get real advice? You may not have somebody. Well, if you're a member of RSPA, you do. You can just call me up or shoot me an email, and we can talk about whatever those issues are. And it's a service there.
Right. Well, you mentioned your previous experience working for Tulsa Cash Register. I know that industry in general has gone through a lot of transitions with, especially over the last decade, with tablets and cloud solutions replacing more of the traditional point of sale systems, the hardware and yep. other things over there. Tell us about the technological shifts you're seeing in that space, and how does it affect MSPs and their customers?
Yeah. So, you jump back 15 years ago and you basically, if you're a merchant and you're coming and you say, hey, I want to buy a system, your options are, here we get this custom hardware and this, $20,000, $30,000 point of sale system that's all integrated and fancy, or we get an ECR, a cash register. and there really wasn't much in the middle. There were different levels of cash register. But in the last decade, we've seen this deployment of tablets and really low-cost hardware, cloud solutions that allow relatively cheap systems to the end user. And this has kind of really turned a lot of businesses on their head. A lot of resellers struggled with how do we change our business model to fit this? Because obviously there's a difference in the margin that you're able to charge for these. You're getting less profit, and so the existing relationships you have with your salespeople on how you're going to pay for commissions and stuff. It's really changed a lot. Today, I'm not directly involved with the resellers as far as how things are going, but what I'm seeing is that more and more resellers that are continuing to remain relevant are offering, they may still be offering the high-end systems, but they're also offering some sort of tablet-based or cloud-backed system. That it's really interesting where that's going.
Yeah, I would imagine that the company. I wanted to frame this first of all because I think when we talk about spaces being realistic, is in some areas it's thriving and growing. In retail, it's been a little challenging, I'm sure, for providers, and they've had to transform their businesses tremendously, probably more than any other IT segment in the past 10 years because of. Well, I think the market in general is very profitability is somewhat low for many parts of the retail segment. So they have to be cost effective with the solutions they provide. But are you seeing more infrastructure support and security? You seeing more of the MSPs kind of and the IT retail providers expanding their offerings to try to boost their business?
Yeah, it seems like there are more and more companies out there offering some type of solution. Whether it's a cloud-based thing or it's hardware or whatever it might be. Used to a reseller or an MSP, they had, here's our product. This is what we sell. This is what we do. Now there's lots of options for lots of different things. And really it just kind of depends on what vertical you're going after. Even when you look at who are we targeting for our what are we reselling or what services are we providing? You almost kind of have to say what groups of businesses are we trying to target and what is the right solution for them. And there's almost an overwhelming number of options out there for people to choose from.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that insight because I think that's crucial to visit the market itself. But let's talk about what we really came today is talk about the biggest current security concerns for retailers right now. What are you seeing that is top of the radar for the companies you work for?
Yeah, so for most resellers, for most retailers, their biggest concern is like any other. And I'm mostly talking about small businesses because there's a big difference between small businesses and large businesses and enterprises. But for those small and medium businesses, their ultimate concern is making payroll, and it's making enough profit to stay in business, And so when we start talking about security, I had a guy at a grocery store say, you know what, I don't care. I sell meat and potatoes. Make it work for me. He doesn't care about security until it affects him, until it causes a problem. And so a lot of times these guys, they don't want to deal with it. They want it to be part of the solution. They want you to provide them a solution that is just secure and it's done and it's okay. And that they don't have to stress out about it. Unfortunately, that's not always easy to do. There's a lot of, for MSPs or resellers, there's a lot of services that can be provided in the name of security. But trying to find that balance of what's appropriate for each retailer is really difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, retail is not just one thing. You've got, the larger, you talked about larger companies like the Targets, and they have their own challenges. But when it comes to, the mom and pops, it could be gas stations and grocery stores and, hat resellers. I think they still have hat resellers, don't they? Or hat sellers?
Probably. I'm picturing those kiosks in the mall.
Yeah, there you go. But that's another option too. Is a lot of them are just the small kiosks that have the swipe card and the Apple Pay and other options out there now. There's a lot of new things there, but the challenges can be many and vary significantly.
And when you think about it, traditionally, I'm thinking about a grocery store down the street from me. They have a cash office. They have a place where the checkers at the end of the day take their till and they go and they turn it into the cash office. And that room has bars on it, and there's a little window if you want to interact with the person. You have to pass through this. People think about, they just instinctively know, I need to secure my cash. What they don't always think about is, nowadays, with all the different forms of electronic payments that you mentioned, there is so much more money going through the network than there is going through that cash office. And so, whether you're a restaurant or a grocery store or retailer or whatever, you have to think about, how do I secure this network? And how do I make sure that not just that the data doesn't get stolen? Because if it gets stolen, that's a significant issue, right? I mean, now you have all kinds of regulatory issues and fines and fees. But more importantly, or as importantly, what happens if the network is degraded in some way to the point that I can't perform my business? What happens if I've got people lining up to pay me and I can't take their card anymore? Most people don't carry cash anymore, or at least a significant number of them don't have enough cash to pay their bill. So that's a real concern that a lot of people just don't take into consideration until they've experienced that problem.
The electronic transactions have kind of been a game changer. But you also brought up another point is even talking about security with retailers. Make sure you're talking about the right type of security, because physical security may be top of their mind, keeping their cash safe, especially those that have been around for a while.
Absolutely. And just, another part of security that people don't think about as often is the reliability of the system. If a system goes down, that's what we would call a denial of service attack. So, what types of redundancy do you have built into the devices and the servers? If you're using a cloud-based system, what if the internet goes down? There's all types of different things that fall into security there to take into consideration.
A great point. I think it was the day before Thanksgiving. I don't know if you heard is it the Van Til or Van Til? I'm not familiar with the chain, but regional grocer that was pretty much had half its locations shut down the day before Thanksgiving because of an attack.
Oh man, I don't think I heard about that one, but yeah, that's a nightmare.
Yeah, that's the worst. One of the worst times of the year, I should say. And I worked in the grocery industry when I was in high school and college, so I just remember what a nightmare that would have been.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier PCI compliance, payment card industry compliance, for those that aren't familiar with the term. It really seems like a critical requirement today. What exactly do these standards cover for those that aren't as familiar with it?
Yeah, so let me back up a little bit and give kind of an understanding of what PCI is. Back in the mid-90s, the early 90s, mid-90s, the government started jumping in and regulating industries where consumers were getting hurt. And so we started seeing things like HIPAA and GLBA and Sarbanes-Oxley, and we saw all these places where the government said, the industry itself is not regulating itself well, and so we're going to do it for you, and we're going to put these protections in place to protect the consumers. The card brands, and hopefully none of your listeners work for the card brands. I'm hoping to not insult anybody, but the payment card brands, we're talking about Visa and MasterCard and Discover and American Express and JCB, which is the Japanese Credit Bureau. The five of them went together and said, we need to fix this problem or the government's going to fix it for us, because we were seeing credit card breaches. We were seeing, money getting stolen and stuff that way. And so they came together and the five of them created a separate independent organization called the Payment Card Industry Security Standards Council, PCI-SSC. And that council's goal, its job, is to develop some security standards and say, this is what you have to do to protect cardholder data. Now, the card brands then, once these standards were created, the card brands then began to enforce those standards via their contractual relationships with the merchants. So what that looks like if your client owns a grocery store or a restaurant, they have a relationship with their payment processor. Their payment processor has a relationship with the card brand. And so the card brand puts language in the contracts telling the processors, all of your customers have to agree to these terms. The processors then put the same language down to the merchant saying, if you're going to accept cards, you have to accept these terms. And what those terms look like is this long list of extremely detailed security standards. I think it's something like over 250 individual items that you have to comply with in regards to protecting your systems and just how you manage all that. So it's fairly overwhelming.
What type of teeth do they have in PCI compliance as compared to like a HIPAA or others out there?
That is a great question. So, basically this is not a legal issue. This is a contractual issue. In other words, this is not the government saying you have to do this. This is the card brand saying, as part of your contract with us, you have to do this. So they can basically enforce anything they want. They have almost carte blanche ability to say, here are the fines that we're going to push down to you, and you have to deal with it. And your option is don't accept credit cards or electric payments of any kind, really, at this point. So for most organizations, that's not an option. So those fines can be pretty substantial. A lot of times it depends on what the actual issue is. They absolutely push down the costs to, let's say your organization was compromised and 5,000 credit cards were stolen. Well, now all 5,000 of those people that have those cards, they have to be sent a new card, and they probably have to be offered a year of identity theft protection, and which is absurd, but that's a different topic. And on top of that, you have the notification costs, and you have the investigation costs to find out what really happened, and so all of those fees get pushed down to the merchant through the processor, as well as just some general fees for not being PCI compliant and that sort of thing. So it can be pretty substantial.
Yeah, we know with government compliance, a lot of times it slides. It takes years before they kick into place. But from my understanding, PCI compliance, you want to adhere to this. There's a lot more financial ramifications up front if there's a violation in place. Is that a fair thing?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as so what normally happens is the card brands, they've invested a lot into really smart technology that analyzes all these different stolen card reports. If somebody uses a card here and it gets stolen and they use another one here. So these back-end systems, they look at all these places and say, oh, here's a single, they call it a CPP, a common point of purchase, where all of these cards were used at this one reseller or this one merchant from this point to this point. We know there had to have been a compromise there. And so once that happens, they contact the merchant and they stop the ability to process cards immediately until everything is fixed. And then they start addressing the fees, they do the investigation and all that kind of stuff. So for the merchant to even hope to stay in business, they have to move on it quickly. They have to pay the fines, they have to address the, whatever legal issues they have, or else they go out of business, because nobody these days can continue to operate without those electronic payments.
Yeah, that sounds like painful ramifications for not following it. What roles are you seeing MSPs and other IT service companies play in PCI compliance for their clients?
That's a great question. So there's a wide range of options. There are so many different services and tools out there that you can resell, different services you can provide. Just a really common one is, just to go out and do basically a compliance review. So you send somebody out to your client and they sit down together and they talk about, here's what your expectations are. Here's what you are required to comply with. Let's see how you're doing. Let's do a checkup. Depending on what other services are being provided, if you provide, as part of your service, you provide different types of hardware. Well, maybe you can go out and provide updates to that hardware, check to make sure there aren't any security patches that need to be done. If you're an MSP that sells a firewall service, you can have somebody that logs into that firewall on a monthly or quarterly basis and validates that the configuration settings that were here before are still in place, that nobody has messed with anything or changed anything. If maybe you can go on site to the clients and validate that their wireless settings are still configured correctly, so that guests can't get on to the corporate network or whatever. There's a wide range of things there. There's also services like vulnerability scanning and penetration testing, user awareness training. It's almost unbelievable how many different offerings there are to be able to offer that kind of stuff. And ultimately, it's the MSP or the reseller has to decide, what do I have the expertise to provide myself? What partners am I willing to work with to provide some of these services? What makes sense for my customers?
Perfect sense. It sounds like there's a lot of complementary services that the providers can bring to retail clients. So that's always a good thing, obviously.
Yeah. Actually, I'll add one other thing. And this is probably, I think, the most important. I always tell resellers and MSPs, your goal should be to become a trusted advisor for your client, so that when the client is sitting on a plane and they read an article in a magazine, or they hear about something on the news and they have a question about security, you want to be their first call. You want to be the guy that they say, you know what, I don't know that much about this, but I've got a guy. You want to be that guy. So they call you and say, help, what do I do about this? And maybe that gives you the opportunity to sell service. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just gives you the opportunity to facilitate that relationship and become closer. So, the next month or the next year, whenever their maintenance contract comes up, they don't even think twice about it. They think, oh yeah, this relationship, I get so much value out of this, I got to keep paying this. So that's that trusted advisor perspective, I think is critical to maintain that relationship with your clients, because you have a lot of competitors, way more now than 10 years ago.
Certainly great advice. Let's switch the table. So how closely do IT service companies themselves adhere to PCI rules in their own businesses? This is one of the areas we're seeing, especially with the Department of Homeland Security announcement they've done a couple times this year, is warning that MSPs themselves are likely targets of cyber criminals and others. Are those that are accepting credit cards following the rules closely? Are they good at eating their own dog food? I like to refer to.
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, not as much. There's actually been, you mentioned a couple different things there. I've talked with a number of resellers and MSPs over the last 18 months who have been very intentionally targeted by attackers. So the attackers realize, hey, I want to go after these merchants. I want to get to this credit card data. But it's becoming more and more difficult to do that because of PCI, because of, vendors have started securing stuff by default a little bit better. There's not as many obvious ways in. So what they look at is they say, well, hey, these MSPs and these resellers, they have remote access to most of their merchants to be able to provide support and whatever necessary there. And so if I can attack the MSP and I can use their credentials to jump into the merchants, now I can do that. In fact, just earlier this week, I spoke with a reseller that one of their internal systems was compromised, and the attacker was able to use the remote access tool over 2 different nights. They did it after hours when nobody was paying attention. They were able to connect to over 400 different merchants and install malware on the point of sale systems that tried to grab credit card data and send it back to the attacker. That's devastating. I mean, not only is it bad, horrible for the merchants themselves, but think about the relationship that creates between that merchant client and the reseller. And so that's been a big area of target. We've seen more and more of that, like I said, in the last 18 months. And in fact, I think about a year ago, the FBI put out a bulletin about that saying, hey, this is happening, watch out for it.
Yeah, I think those bulletins are becoming faster and more frequent here because of the targeting. And to your point about, building a trusted relationship, nothing will sink that faster than being compromised on the security side. Absolutely.
So we're starting to see more and more services companies recognize this and say, hey, I need to do something. But there's still a long ways to go. There's a lot of them that just think, well, I'm a small company, I don't have to deal with this. They just think you mentioned Target earlier. The way the Target compromise happened was a HVAC vendor. I want to say it was somewhere in the Northeast. It might have been Pennsylvania or New York. I don't remember where. But that HVAC vendor had remote access into Target's network. And so the attackers knew that. They figured that out. And so they targeted this vendor, compromised those systems, and then jumped in over that remote access into Target's network and then went from there. So the attackers are smart, and they're finding ways, they're finding the weak spots.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's a scary perspective too. Is you have to block not only making sure you're securing your clients' networks, but starting at home and following all the best practices and training and all of the things we talked about earlier. But so what advice do you have for MSPs that are interested in taking on retail clients?
So the biggest thing is you need to understand their business. If you're going to be a service provider to help somebody in their business, you need to understand what their goals are and their motivations. If I'm a restaurant owner and I make a very small margin, and I'm struggling, like I said, to make payroll and just stay in business because the number of restaurants that turn over is just crazy. And as an MSP, you came in and you say, hey, we're going to provide you this or that. It's really hard to say, why should I pay all this money when I don't even recognize the risk? So MSPs, whoever they take on as a client in whatever vertical they need to understand kind of the business model, what those folks are trying to do, and how these products actually benefit them. I'm not a good sales guy from the perspective of, here, I'm just going to go out and sell you whatever I can to make money. In my opinion, a good salesperson is the kind of person that says, you know what, this is what you need. If the product I have fits that, great. If not, maybe I can find another product. If not, you need to go somewhere else. But I think if you build that relationship with these clients where you provide services and tools that are useful to them and help them meet their end goal, you're not gonna have any shortage of business.
Makes sense. Even little things like, little things, but retail hours a lot of times are much longer than traditional businesses, is being flexible and making sure you have the support for when they need it, whether it's 11 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely.
That can be a challenge.
Well, and understanding things like you mentioned, working or the situation with the grocery store that had the compromise right before Thanksgiving. You need to understand that, hey, if you're working with grocery stores, right before major holidays and during major holidays is a huge thing. Depending on the state you're in, we have a grocery store chain here in Oklahoma that a significant amount of their income comes from the food stamp program, just because of the areas where the grocery store has deployed itself. Sure. And so knowing that and understanding that, hey, on these certain days of the month when food stamps are distributed, that's a massive time. And so, yeah, being able to provide support or just making sure that, if you have a cloud-based system or some type of infrastructure you're providing, being sure that you can fully support the needs of the merchant. That's critical.
So don't do software updates on the first of the month. This is probably one good example, right?
Very, very likely. Yeah. In that situation. Yeah. Know when people get paid and when they're shopping and when they're not. Absolutely.
Gotcha. So one last question. What is the value of working with an outsourced technology firm, even if the business has its own internal technical staff? From your perspective, Nathan, what are your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, that's a great question. Every company has to decide, what are we capable of providing successfully? Can you provide this? Here's an example. When I was at TCR, we recognized that offsite backup was becoming an issue. We were having clients. We had a client that their hardware got stolen. We had a client that the building burned down. We had a client where the computer system got malware infected and they didn't have a backup. So we said, hey, we need to do offsite backup. And so we spent a lot of time and effort building an offsite backup program that we built and maintained ourselves. And it was good enough. But very quickly we realized, you know what, there's a lot of third-party services that we can resell that are much better, much more effective, and our profitability will actually be higher because we don't have to support it. So you have to, first off, you have to understand the actual skill set of your technical staff. A lot of business owners just think, hey, I've got this guy that can do anything. That may be, but he's got some limitations. And so understand their skill set. And then you have to look at, okay, what is the actual cost, not just to build it out, but to continue to support it, to provide updates, whatever that service may be, as opposed to if we have somebody else do it and we don't have to worry about any of the costs. If internally, if you have a system go down and that causes an outage for your customers, that's a big deal. And so if you don't have the ability to host your stuff in a data center that has all the redundancy and stuff like that, there's just a lot of reasons why sometimes it's better to use another firm that can provide those services better.
Makes perfect sense. I know I was reading a research piece yesterday about the average IT security professional now earns over $77,000 a year. That's average, but the specialists are easily topping 100,000. So
Yeah,
for
I believe that.
small businesses to hire them, it doesn't always make sense. For MSPs, if you can leverage that the right way, it can be a very good business practice.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
So great. So before we close, do you have any final thoughts on cybersecurity? And one thing I'd like is if you could leave the audience with great way to get in contact with you in case they have questions or would just like to follow up.
Sure. So one of the things that I like to tell people is you can never be secure. Secure is not an endpoint. It's not a destination. Secure is a path. It's a road that you travel. You don't buy a car that has all security controls in place and everything and say, okay, my car is secure. No, every time you get out of your car, you click the button and you lock it, or you set the alarm. You pay attention to where you park. You have these concepts. When you leave your house, you do something every time you do it. It becomes a way of life, as opposed to I bought this system, so I'm secure. And so folks need to, when they think about security, they need to think about I'm not selling a secure thing. I'm selling security as a process or as a service or we're going to help you become more and more secure. It's not something that you will ever completely get there. And the reason for that is because you have this back and forth. You have intelligent adversaries it's really an arms race. Every time you become more secure, they're trying to find new ways to attack. So I would love to help folks out. I mentioned our company does a lot on training and trying to help people improve. We put out a lot of blog posts and webinars and stuff like that. The easiest way to get a hold of me is either nathan@secureideas.com, or you can just go to our website, secureideas.com. Or I'm fairly active on Twitter. It's @Sweaney, SWEANEY. I would love to talk with folks.
Excellent advice. Thanks for your time. We definitely appreciate the time that Nathan Sweaney from Secure Ideas shared for us today and his expertise in cybersecurity and the retail industry. We appreciate all those who tuned in to listen to our discussion today as well. I encourage you to take a minute and check out the list of upcoming IoTSSA Cybersecurity Expo one-day events on the association's website. That's IoTSSA.com. For those who are interested, our next stop will be January 24th at the Topgolf Conference Center in Jacksonville, Florida. We'll also be traveling to Salt Lake City, Columbus, Ohio, Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., and Philly areas in 2019. So be sure to check out all the events section on our website for the dates and registration details. Once again, thanks for joining us. We hope you have a profitable and highly secure day.